listening to the Hunter Conservationist Podcast.
In the early 1900s, the U.S. federal government and its conservationists and its staff and its biologists and folks that knew about ducks and duck hunting and migratory birds and naturalists that were all part of the U.S. government was recognizing that the United States was in the position that it needed to have some sort of legal mechanisms for the protection of migratory birds. And it made a run at developing migratory legislation federally that would apply across the states in the United States. And they kind of got shot down because of the U.S. Constitution and not being something that the federal government had authority to do over the states. The federal government then started discussions with Canada and saying, like, hey, could we develop an international treaty, because there's nothing the states can do. And they did try after the international treaty was ratified, but the federal government has jurisdictions to enter into international treaties. And Canada and the United States, and it was almost like Canada actually helped out the US and helped out waterfowl in North America by agreeing to actually negotiate an international treaty. It didn't go so well on the Canadian side at the Dominion at the time. Some of the provinces were a little upset and by the dates and stuff that were being negotiated. And there's the whole story about Newfoundland, when it came time to join the Dominion, didn't want to because of some of the restrictions that got negotiated with sea duck hunting. And it's a fascinating part of Canadian history and North American history. But at the end of the day, the United States and Canada ratified the Convention for the Protection of Migratory Birds in December 7th, 1916, and it went into force, I believe, at that moment when it was ratified. And it was instrumental. And, a lot of people talk about the North American model of wildlife conservation kind of being the greatest, thing that ever happened in North America, the conservation model, the recovery of, white-tailed deer and turkey and elk and pronghorn. I still stand by to this day that I consider the International Treaty for the Protection of Migratory Birds to be the greatest conservation success story in the history of North America, because it was the conservation of a guild of wildlife where the scope of the conservation action was at the scale of a continent. So birds that were nesting in the Arctic and wintering in the Gulf of Mexico or in Mexico, that was their habitat. And the two largest countries on the continent got together and said, this is how we have to manage them. And to me, that's been a success, and it shows in, a lot of our migratory bird populations, especially in the Central Flyway and, especially in snow goose and Canada geese. We've arrived at a point where everybody hates Canada geese in the urban areas. So as we did a pretty good job our forefathers did a pretty good job. So, about 25 years ago, I started hunting turkeys when it kind of became a thing here in southeastern BC, and I fell in love with it. And I sort of thought to myself, if I could go back and do it over again, I would become a turkey biologist. I am just so enamored with everything to do with turkeys. And then I started duck hunting, and I got a dog, and that's completely changed my world. In fact, turkey hunting now is just kind of like, geez, I hope I get one in the first day so that I can then grab my dog and go bear hunting, because he bear hunts with me as well, and deer hunts, and he's just my little hunting buddy, and I don't like to leave him in the kennel when I go out and do any other type of hunting. And I become fascinated with waterfowl and the species and their behavior and just the epic migration that they go on every year. I know, just standing down on the reservoir by the Montana border and in November, late November and stuff, and just watching these big flocks go by, and I'm just literally thinking about where they're coming from, where they're going, and I'm like, I should have became a duck biologist. They're just so fascinating. So here I am. I'm turning 59 this year, and it's like I still don't know what I want to be. And I was like, oh, I'm not going to go back to school to become a duck biologist. But I'm so excited for this show because it is about ducks and waterfowl and all types of stuff to what's going on in Canada with them, and look forward to learning everything we can from Jim about it. And hey, everybody, it's Mark Hall, your host.
And it's Curtis Hall, your co-host. The Hunter Conservationist podcast is brought to you by J. Martin Taxidermy. If you want to preserve your most treasured hunting memories, J. Martin Taxidermy in West Kelowna, British Columbia is your go-to. This top-tier, family-run business was founded by Jesse Martin, who grew up in the breathtaking Okanagan Valley, steeped in a deep hunting heritage. Blending passion with skill, Jesse trained formally at the Penn School of Taxidermy, bringing artistry and precision to every mount. Alongside his wife and their 2 sons, he operates a cutting-edge facility ready to meet all your wildlife taxidermy needs. Serving clients locally and worldwide, J. Martin Taxidermy handles everything from wildlife permits to shipping with expert care, ensuring your hunting experiences are captured forever. Check them out, jmartintaxidermy.com. And as always, big shout out, big thanks to Jesse for continuing to support us here on this show.
I think it's been a couple of shows since I did a taxidermy fact, Jim. So sometimes I've been pulling up these things, these little facts about taxidermy, and back to the time of the Egyptians. And I think the last time we talked about it, I asked everybody on the show, I said, was the mummification of the pharaohs considered taxidermy, yes or no? And the answer was no. It was taxidermy does not apply to people, and the goal was not to recreate the pharaohs in a lifelike setting. It was strictly preservation to get them into the afterworld. So just stuff like that. So here's one for this show. So Charles Darwin. Everybody knows Charles Darwin and his theories of evolution. It was actually, his theory was descent by modification. I actually read Origins of Species. I don't know if you have. It's a humongous thick book, but years ago I read it. Another side fact, Charles Darwin did not claim that humans evolved from primates. The very end of his book, after talking about the evolution of people and primates and the similarities, he said this may shed light on the evolution of Homo sapien. And he left it up to the reader. So he gets blamed a lot for that. But anyways, Charles Darwin learned taxidermy from a former enslaved Guyanese man named John Edmund Stone. John Edmund Stone had learned the skill from a naturalist, Charles Waterton, who brought him on expeditions. Edmund Stone charged Darwin a guinea an hour. I had to look that up. I thought, well, the guy gave him a bird every hour that he was training him how to do taxidermy. But a guinea was a British form of currency, and it was equivalent to £1 and 1 shilling. That was a guinea. So he was charged that much an hour to teach Charles Darwin taxidermy. Darwin wrote to his sister that Edmund Stone, quote unquote, gained his livelihood by stuffing birds, which he did excellently. So without the skills taught to him by Edmund Stone, Darwin likely would not have been able to nab the job that he got on the HMS Beagle, which landed him in the Galapagos and areas around the world, where he collected and preserved specimens and made the observations about that he formed the theory of descent with modification, which we now call evolution. So there's taxidermy for you, where it fit in. So Jim, welcome to the show.
Oh, great to join you. Yeah, thanks for having us.
Jim Fisher, you are the VP of Canadian Policy for Delta Waterfowl, and you're in Winnipeg.
That's right.
And he was telling us just before the show, been out doing the snow goose and Canada goose spring conservation hunts in Manitoba. So that's making Curtis and I very jealous. So I think it's the spring conservation hunts are, I know they're in southern Alberta, Manitoba. Does Saskatchewan also have them? They must.
Yep, Saskatchewan has it. Quebec has it for greater snow geese, as well as eastern parts of Ontario.
Okay. Now, years ago, I had heard or read some stories, and I think it was Manitoba, where the spring season is set up so that the first snow goose flights that are coming back are the ones that go into the high Arctic, and they want to let those ones go by. It's the second waves that come that tend to then drop into the agriculture fields when they're getting started, that the conservation hunt wants to kind of, is that still the case? Do they kind of
it's
go by, or
the,
or you get them all?
it's partially true. The birds that are going through the Hudson Bay lowlands on their way further north to nest, as well as the local birds there, are taking the vegetation and ripping it right out of the ground and basically destroying that whole ecosystem. And so,
Wow.
but the hunting seasons themselves in the south, if you will, like where we are, it's not so specific to try and target higher nesting snow geese versus the ones further south. So it's open, and in fact they opened it the first few years. They opened it kind of too late, and a lot of snow geese were coming through before the season started, and so they kept kind of pushing it back and back. They had two iterations of pushing it earlier, such that essentially the very first snow geese coming back, or you're able to hunt them now.
Okay.
So the season actually opens prior to the geese showing up, 99% of the time, and it's just and they were worried that hunters would be out hunting and wondering why they're not seeing any geese. Was their rationale for kind of trying to fine tune the timing initially. So, but hunters are not that. They're a little smarter than that, as it turns out.
Okay, good. Well, this is already kind of off topic a little bit, but under the international treaty, the convention, the countries agreed to a maximum number of days that a jurisdiction would have to hunt waterfowl in a year, migratory birds in the year. Now that we have these spring conservation hunts across the prairie regions of Canada, is that come off the fall seasons? Was that agreed to be not impact those numbers of days?
Yeah, they declare them as overabundant. So snow geese, both lesser snow geese initially, then eventually they got around to bringing Ross geese in with the snow geese. As you can imagine, that was a challenge initially. And then specific to Manitoba, they declared Canada geese overabundant. And now that's the temperate or the large Canada geese that nest in the south. And so they try and time it such that the Arctic nesting geese, the smaller Richardsons, or there's a bunch of terms for them, but anyway, the small Canada goose, they try and time it such that they're not here yet, and they shut the season down April 10th to try and accommodate that.
Okay. No, I appreciate that. And I'm just trying to remember, what's the maximum days?
It's 107 in Canada. The States are a myriad of numbers of days, more in the West, in the Pacific Flyway, and then a little bit less in the Central Flyway, and then Mississippi and Atlantic Flyway in the U.S. are 60 days when there's liberal seasons. So that's the maximum that you could have in a lot of the states is 60 days, but much more so in California and in the West. But yeah, in Canada, it's across the board. It's pretty much 107 days for each of the 10 provinces now. And there's a story there that we can get into later, but we were just able to push the maritime provinces to accommodate that 107 days, whereas prior to this past season, they were not taking advantage of the full 107 days, believe it or not.
Holy, that's interesting. I think it's in Ontario where there's various regions are tackling the Sunday hunting issue, but it's like, okay, that's got to impact the 107 days. So it's like, do you want a later start or a longer in the fall? And hunters are having to like give their input into kind of where they want the math to be adjusted if Sunday hunting comes back in a particular area. We don't have to worry about those things in BC and
No, in the west, it's pretty straightforward here. In Saskatchewan and Manitoba, as you're talking about the treaty states, you can only start at September 1st. So you run 107 days for Saskatchewan and Manitoba, you get into December, and pretty hard pressed to find any waterfowl in December.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Huh.
But it's interesting. You could take compensatory days for lost Sundays. That's another whole topic between the feds and the provinces where Sunday hunting is not allowed. Do the provinces then say, okay, well, that's 12 or 13 Sundays that you can't hunt. And so could you take extra days in lieu of those days? And that has not really been the case, other than there is one example where it is happening, and one only, and that's in Ontario, as you alluded to, where the province decided to go to a municipally run Sunday hunting opportunity. So there's, I don't know how many municipalities in Ontario, somewhere in the realm of 200. And, we've been promoting the switch to allowing Sunday hunting. But part of the challenge is that in that case for geese, they offer a late season goose hunting opportunity for the municipalities that don't have Sundays. So they have a 7 or 8 day season that starts kind of the third or fourth week of February and runs for 8 days in those jurisdictions that you can't hunt Sundays. And that's become so popular now that it's created a problem on the flip side, where when municipalities and hunters get together and say, well, gee, maybe we should embrace this Sunday hunting opportunity, the hunters themselves say, well, we don't want it because we'd rather keep our Canada goose season in February. So we're trying to address that right now. Actually, that's one of our highest priorities for regulation change in Ontario. And Delta and OFAH, the Federation of Anglers and Hunters, are working together with the federal and provincial governments right now to do some work to remedy that whole challenge.
Wow. So complicated. So, and then poor they've had some, I think, started like early last year, and there was just another one, I think, before the federal election, where some of the municipalities want to ban the discharge of firearms in their municipality. So it's like, holy smoke. So
that's perhaps our biggest challenge. And we have a fellow who works with myself who used to be with the OFAH, and we were lucky to hire him on at Delta, Brian McRae, and he's an expert on that exact issue and dealing with municipal discharge bylaws. And he just mentioned a new one came up today in an email, and so he's
really?
got
Yeah,
about.
The one I heard was about a month ago. It included archery as well. So
yes, they're very complicated, and it's they're citing public safety concerns, and that's just not the case when it comes to hunting in these areas. So
that's the new way that they're all coming at this stuff, right? It's a threat to public safety. So
yes,
that's a different thing. Well, let's kind of like start at the beginning and give us a bit of history on Delta and then your expansion into Canada and your mission here, and what you do in your job.
Sure, that's I could talk for a while on those topics, Mark. But yeah, Delta's had a long history. We can trace our origins back to 1911, and really the history that I'm at least the most familiar with is something that happened in the 30s, where James Ford Bell, who was a founder of General Mills in Minneapolis, he was a fantastic canvasback hunter, and he hunted a lake in southwestern Minnesota that kind of deteriorated, and had heard of how great the Delta Marsh was in Manitoba, and decided to go explore up there, and in the 20s, and quietly acquired some land along the lake shore of Lake Manitoba, and first just embraced the duck hunting. But then in the 30s, of course, when the duck populations really tanked with the big drought that was happening throughout the 30s, it was a lot of questions from hunters. As obviously their food was a big problem at that time, but crazy duck hunters that we were concerned about ducks, and so he started reaching out.
Soil's blowing off
Yeah,
the farmland, and we're still like, oh man,
yeah, but what about the
they're
ducks?
circling.
Yeah,
They're
that's
circling.
the real important stuff, hey. But anyway, so he reached out to some professors at that time, one of which was Aldo Leopold at University of Wisconsin, and Aldo Leopold, of course, was kind of the father of conservation, and he ended up sending one of his grad students up to the Delta Marsh and work with James Ford Bell, and his name was Albert Hochbaum, but he ended up just falling in love with the Delta Marsh, and he was our first grad student, and he stayed there. He married the kind of gamekeeper's daughter, and spent the rest of his days on the Delta Marsh. And he was a real brilliant man, and really started looking at what was driving duck populations. And I could go on and on about all the things that he discovered. Probably most important was the fact that that the ducks were really coming from small prairie potholes and not big marshes like the Delta Marsh. Delta Marsh is fabulous. There's quite a bit of duck nesting around it, but it's really best known for its staging of migrating ducks and geese. So anyway, so he found that the small prairie potholes on mostly on farm land were really what drove the duck populations. And anyway, so that was kind of the start of Delta, was doing research, and so James Ford Bell reached out to other industrial people of the day, and got funding. I could list some of the names, but it probably doesn't matter. And so we started funding research and grad students at universities all over North America to look at what are the key challenges that ducks are facing in their annual cycle. And in the early days was just even finding out how many eggs did they lay and where do they nest, and just really basic biology. And that over time evolved, and so at the end of the day, Delta's funded about 400 masters and PhDs up to this time. And so we try and answer a lot of important questions related to ducks, but also training our future biologists is a kind of secondary and perhaps more important outcome from that effort. And so a lot of those grad students are doing field research, and they also have assistants that come. So there's a myriad of both the grad students and even more undergrads and other people interested in studying waterfowl over their lifetime. And so that's kind of the rich history of Delta. A lot of those people have gone on to be running Ducks Unlimited, running the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Canadian Wildlife Service, provincial governments, and so on and so forth all over North America. And so that's a tremendous legacy.
Oh, no doubt. Yeah, no doubt. Yeah, that's a great thing to invest in folks that are interested in going into wildlife biology, like even, large mammals, carnivores, anything like that. And I don't know that there's as much in Canada. They have, they don't have the co-op programs like they do in the US, the collaborative, between the state and the universities researching, stuff, and people getting their degrees and that out of it. And I know it was tried here, or proposed here in British Columbia, and the government wasn't even interested in sort of a university co-op model. But yeah, you see the odd scholarship here and that sort of thing. But it sounds like Delta was it was some pretty big initiatives investing in that many students. So, wow. See, I should have became a duck biologist.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I've been fortunate. I was lucky enough as well. I was very interested at, starting out as a kid who loved the outdoors, and we had a cottage near a lake and loved to fish and do all that stuff. And then my uncle, he came back from Cape Breton. He grew up in Winnipeg, but he used to come back every fall around Thanksgiving and drag me out starting when I was 10, and loading up in his old 59 Chevy and driving up to this place called Tin Town. And I immediately just fell in love with it, paddling in the canoe in the darkness out on this big, vast marsh with big bays and rollers and reeds and scads of ducks flying by. And it just totally, it grabbed me. And so ever since I was 12, I knew that I wanted to pursue this as a career. So very fortunate.
Wow.
Just happened to be that I grew up in Portage la Prairie, which is just adjacent to the Delta Marsh essentially. And so I came by it honestly, and and so I ended up doing my master's. I did an undergrad and couldn't find a job, so I had a chance to do a master's and took that on, and worked in the Prairie Pothole region and working with farmers and looking for duck nests and all that. And that was kind of the start of it for me. And it was a time that Delta kind of shifted, rightly or wrongly. It kind of changed course in the early 90s and evolved and started doing some other things other than, in quotations, just research, and expanded into kind of trying to do something to help the ducks directly. So that's a kind of a new chapter.
More like then. Direct habitat management type work. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So I could just chat about that if you'd like. And
sure. Well, yeah. The one thing I want to know is when did sort of the Canadian, part of Delta, put people in place, and like yourself and stuff? How long has the history been specific to the Canadian operation? Yeah,
it's a great question. The like at the Delta, it really evolved from the Delta Marsh in Manitoba, and it was the people that ran it were a mixture of Americans and Canadians. So Albert Hochbaum was certainly an American, and at the same time, his right-hand man at the time was Peter Ward, who was another extremely talented duck biologist, kind of not essentially as well schooled as Aldo, made Albert, but Peter Ward was a brilliant biologist, kind of from learning and working with Albert Hochbaum.
Wow. Okay.
And so he was Canadian, and then parts of that family intermingled, and that was the start of it. And then the students came on, and then there was, when Albert Hochbaum retired, there was a few different directors came on, some Canadian. Most renowned was a guy named Bruce Batt. Dr. Bruce Batt was a Delta student, and he took over he was our director for a long time, and lived in Portage and worked at the Marsh. So Delta's really been a going concern. I would argue more so in Canada than in the U.S. initially,
wow.
despite the backing of American philanthropic duck hunters, right? So
Yeah, yeah. Well, that really kind of like embodies the way the international treaty sort of unfolded, because I've read so much about it because it's fascinating, and it was just like it was people that cared about waterfowl, migratory birds, and wetland conservation and stuff, and it just kind of you just did what needed to get done to like make things happen, and people were flowing back and forth across the border. And
well,
one of the great Canadian conservationists, Gordon Hewitt, who was actually an entomologist by training, was instrumental in helping ensure that the treaty got ratified. And these trips back and forth working with colleagues in the US, and this is a problem, well, I'll go back and see if I can get my government to do this to help your government. That just sounds like the genesis of Delta itself was that a spin-off from that collaborative effort that got the treaty put in place.
well, and I mean there are several examples of how biologists from both sides of the line work collaboratively and address a lot of the issues. And one obvious one is the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, and so that's really it generates money in the U.S. It gets matched, both in the U.S. and then also up here in Canada, and then a lot of the money gets spent to conserve wetlands in Canada, kind of throughout Canada.
And I think that's an important point for folks, listening, is the U.S. invests a lot in Canadian wetland conservation work in Canada. Years ago, I was way in northern British Columbia, up in the Dawson Creek area, so kind of in the corner with Alberta and BC kind of meet in the Peace region, east side of the Rockies. And my daughter took me out to an area just to take the dogs for a walk, and it happened to be a wetland conservation area, and this big sign where you parked on the side of the road, and there's this little thing at the bottom that was recognizing where the money came from for this habitat conservation work, and one of them was the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. I was like way up there. It was just kind of cool. You could see where money was flowing to protect wetlands, because eventually those birds found their way to the state. So it's I just like people to know that there's cross-border investment.
And it's interesting where one country can kind of lead and then the other country can follow. So there's other examples of that. If you study the U.S. duck stamp as an example, that was launched in 1934 with Ding Darling and all that, that's another fascinating history. And the federal duck stamp in the U.S. is probably had the biggest impact on duck populations and waterfowl management of anything. It's got the biggest legacy, and in Canada we followed suit in the mid 80s to bring in our own federal duck stamp, and there was several people involved with that, and that continues to this day with a partnership with Wildlife Habitat Canada and Canadian Wildlife Service. And the examples are endless as far as, another great one is like what the federal duck stamp did in the U.S. was one of the three things that it did was sign perpetual easements on wetlands to protect wetlands in perpetuity. And that started in the 50s. And in Canada, we didn't even have legislation until the 1990s to have conservation groups do easements to protect wetlands and grasslands. And so we learn from each other on a lot of these things and work together to ensure that, the good practices happen. So.
Oh, exactly. Now, you were mentioning before Delta has like 4 pillars that its operations run under. So maybe explain what those are. Is that, obviously probably ties to, migratory bird ecology, but are they each one of them sort of like as a focus area of what the organization does?
It kind of keeps us focused. As you can appreciate, you can be a mile wide and an inch deep if you tackle every single issue that different people bring to the fore, whether that's our own staff or our board, or so you have to be a little
waterfowl
focused.
hunters are so passionate about this stuff. The great thing is we can sit in a duck blind and talk about this stuff, and we don't need to be quiet until somebody like that, right?
We
Where any other type of hunting, you can't sit there and, hey, did you know the deer hunting thing and the night conservation? And it's like, would you be
you
quiet?
just
Like,
ruined the whole hunt. Yeah.
yeah, duck hunters, we don't have to do that. We can wave our arms and be
I,
passionate
I'm
about
kind of a
things. So,
social guy, so maybe that's why duck hunting is my big thing. But yeah, the four pillars. The first one is research, which we've already touched on. The second one is conservation and habitat, which is one of the big things I'm working on, but there's a number of people working on that. And that's mostly through policy work. It's not us directly delivering conservation or habitat ourselves as Delta. The third one is duck production. So we've worked on a couple of tools, not that we came up with the tools necessarily ourselves. So that's predator management and hen houses to provide safe places for ducks to nest and boost recruitment or hatching rates.
Yeah.
And the last one, and perhaps most significant one, is a hunter R3 stuff, which is right up your alley.
Okay.
Is to ensure the future of hunting, do advocacy as we touched on already, to provide opportunities and deal with threats to hunting. So it's kind of I like to think more of the proactive things, the positive things. We can alter regulations to provide additional opportunities for hunters, but certainly you need to be reactive as well, as sadly as we all know that there's threats like those bylaw issues you brought up in Ontario and elsewhere in Canada.
Yeah. So that those sort of form where each of the groups in the organization are kind of got the bow of the boat pointed for the year. Okay.
That's right. And I could just touch briefly on them if you like, or where do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. Peel into them. Well, let's go backwards. Like start at the R3 stuff. I know, like Delta's done some sponsorship work with college students, and a friend of ours, Mateen Hassimi from UBC Okanagan in Kelowna, is very active in BHA and BC and setting up collegiate chapters. And amongst all of his studies and stuff, he started a waterfowl program in southern British Columbia to get college-age students that are curious about hunting, and I know you guys helped him out a lot in getting those students out and whatnot, and that would be part of the R3 program, right? Like getting people that are curious about hunting into hunting.
Yeah, it all goes back the kind of hunter recruitment or mentored hunts, if you will. We've had a long run at that as Delta with partners. Started here in Manitoba, but has expanded across both countries. And a lot of what we initially did was taking kids, because I think just it was intuitive that a lot of us started when we were kids. But in today's thinking, yes, kids are good, and if you do mentored hunts, then that's great to start them off young. But there's also the whole analogy of planting trees. If you plant a little sapling or you get a 10-footer in there, if you put the 10-footer, your recruitment rate is likely going to be better. And so, So the adult hunting is really important as well. I would never say, hey, we shouldn't be taking our youth out, because that's the best thing. But the next best thing, I think, is to reach out to adults, and as you allude to, at university age, well, at that point in our lives, we do a lot of experimenting, maybe some of it good and some of it not as good, but that's how we learn and shapes who we are as people, and it's a real opportunity to explore things. And unlike say a 12-year-old kid, at that point, you probably have a driver's license and some wheels and a few dollars in your pocket. You could go buy some shells and give it a whirl. And
And actually get your hunting license and a firearms license if you're
that's right. And
okay.
so
That makes a lot of sense.
so we're keen. So we do a number of things at Delta. So there's just direct mentored hunts where we and that's taken all kinds of different people, whether that's youth, as we talked about. University students is a big focus of ours with the university hunt program, but also taking women out, veterans out, and so on and so forth, and families. And so there's all kinds of opportunities in the university hunt program. We actually have a Canadian fellow who's based in Ontario named Alan Catrice, and that's his job is the R3 stuff for Canada, and he's really focusing on the university hunt program. So he's got, I don't know the exact number, I should have looked it up, but it's somewhere around 35 or 40 different universities and colleges throughout Canada,
Wow.
that we are working with professors to have a program to take, and we focus it on the future wildlife professionals. So it's not just any student in any faculty. It's focused on trying to ensure that our future people running departments of environment or wildlife, federally, provincially, know what hunting's about, because we've seen a real erosion in government away from game management to dealing with species at risk and other topics of the day, creating more parks and all these things, and meanwhile hunting, fishing, trapping is done a disservice when there's no interest in that at those government levels, because they're the ones in charge of it all. So we find ourselves difficult.
We want to give the Canada geese in the park a contraceptive, because that's being nice to them, as opposed to just putting them on the barbecue and making the urban conflict problem go away. That's a different mentality of where your background comes from, right?
Well, and that's the case. I mean, hunters can provide a real service when it comes to wildlife management, as you've already brought up. So, in the North American model and barbecuing,
yeah, which is way cheaper than trying to addle goose eggs and give them contraceptive pills and stuff. It's just crazy that stuff goes on. But yeah, that's an exciting program at the college level. So good for you guys. It's
so and the other component that I work. I've been on the mentored hunts. I do it every year. It's not really in my job description, but just because I enjoy taking people so much, I just make time, and so I participate both in a youth hunt every year at the Delta Marsh with our local chapter, the Portage Legacy chapter. But I also participate. We do a kind of a 3 days, but we take two groups of university and college students out from Brandon and Winnipeg over a weekend. And so I participate with that every year and work with the professors to ensure that happens. So those are really important. The other component to all this is our advocacy around hunting, and we've already touched on it. So there's kind of a 1-2 punch. One is directly trying to recruit people by encouraging working with our chapters. I should mention that as well. They're the drivers. I mean, they support us financially, but they also provide the mentors to take all these new hunters out. But we have staff, Brian and I, work on all these issues across the country. So these bylaw issues, so that falls into the Hunter R3 pillar as well.
Okay, interesting.
And
that makes sense.
Yeah, the advocacy is a really important thing. So we sit on the Atlantic Flyway Technical Committee, and that's usually meets at the Canadian Wildlife Service office in Sackville, New Brunswick. So Brian and I attend that, and then we also have one in Ontario, the Ontario Waterfowl Advisory Committee, and we discuss, what's happening with populations. We discuss what their banding efforts are and all the work that they do. And our sole, not sole purpose, but our big purpose for attending those types of meetings is to look at the regulations and say, can these regulations be tweaked such that it's providing, removing barriers to point of entry for people who want to give hunting a try, but also providing more opportunities. And I mean, we have spreadsheets of all the things that, and we will not achieve all the things in those spreadsheets. It's endless almost. And new ideas come up from our members in each province frequently, saying, hey, well, what about this? And why don't we have that? And I mean, we've dealt with things like in Newfoundland. Why are the merganser seasons the way they're set up in the inland versus the coastal merganser seasons? And so we actually are the advocate for the hunters to talk with the government to enable change. And so, I mean, we have a long list of a big list of things we'd love to see happen, and a much shorter list of things we actually have achieved. As you can appreciate, it doesn't just happen. It's you have to be dogged, and sometimes it happens really quickly. You get a minister that is a hunter, for an example. You can see change dramatically, and we have those opportunities right now. New Brunswick had a minister, Mike Holland, who brought in turkey hunting in New Brunswick.
Right.
And
That
he
wasn't that long ago. Yeah.
Yeah, and he brought in more Sunday hunting opportunity in New Brunswick, and so on and so forth. And we've also seen, in PEI this past duck season, the minister eliminated the Sunday hunting restriction, so you can hunt 7 days in PEI for the first time ever this past fall. Plus,
Wow.
the 3 maritime provinces expanded their season to the full 107 days. And if it weren't for Delta, there's lots of other key people there, but Delta was the one that worked with the provincial staff and minister to see these changes. And the end result for specific to PEI with those 2 changes was an additional 28 days of duck hunting. Like, moved the needle incredibly so, and so it, and that's all. I mean, you can thank a whole bunch, of people for that, but and I'm not trying to toot Delta's horn exclusively. There's a lot of key players in that staff of the provincial government, the minister himself, chapter efforts and lobbying,
But there's every big win like that has a champion. You can work with, but there's a champion, right?
That's right. Yeah.
And that's just the way the system works. And it's when we don't have a champion, somebody that owns something and tries to get the team to push it across, then nobody gets ahead. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with acknowledging your organization as being the champion for some of that stuff. And in this day and age, people are like, well, what's Sunday hunting? Like, why make a big deal about it? But the difference of somebody participating in hunting or not, or just giving it up, in this day and age when folks are, families and jobs and Monday to Friday and you just have the weekend rolls around, to think that you only have one day a week that you can go out and go hunting, like, that's a big thing. And not everybody has great vacation packages and I get to take 3 weeks off during the peak of duck season, whatever, or the deer rut. So those little things like a Sunday hunting type thing can be the order of magnitude that has on people's excitement and participation in hunting is massive.
It's incredible, and it for a lot of those people it doubles their time afield.
Yeah.
That's
who
big.
wouldn't want to get twice the number of days per month in
you think
hunting. So
how society has changed. I mean, you can do virtually everything else now on Sundays. So why are we still stuck in the mud? And so we're only left now with Nova Scotia, who have 2 days of Sunday hunting, believe it or not. So they have it during the rifle deer season. They have the 2 Sundays, and you can hunt anything those 2 Sundays. But so that's our next priority as far as the Sunday hunting file, and we're chipping away on
like 2 Sundays for the whole fall.
For all the fall. So they're missing out on about 12 days.
You get to pick the Sunday, or is it pre-programmed for you, or do you get to pick the Sundays?
Yeah. No, you don't get to pick them yet.
So like that's crazy, because guess what's going to happen on those 2 Sundays, and the quality of experience is going to be horrible because there's like 800 people went to the same duck pond. Jeez.
Yeah.
Come on, Nova Scotia.
I know we're on it. It'll take some time. We're not going away though. You have to be dogged on these things, and you have to strike the right minister and staff that are keen. So it may take some time, just to be honest. But
they had trouble advancing their spring black bear hunting season last year. That caused a big fervor. So
took a bit of
about Nova Scotia.
Yeah, they had some challenges with that this year, and so the appetite may or may not be there right now to seek a win for hunters. That's a possibility that could be happening. And then in Ontario, they're going by municipality. So in the last couple of years, we've brought on another probably 6 or 8 new municipalities, and that's an ongoing thing. And so there's optimism there as well. And if we can address this Canada Goose thing we talked about as well, I think that will bode well for some of those key southern wildlife management units.
Wow. Well, listen, it's exciting learning about this stuff, because there's so much going on in the waterfowl conservation and hunting side of things in Canada that, maybe folks don't really appreciate, because not every, British Columbia is not a big kind of waterfowl hunting culture. It's a big game culture. And so trying to get people, their eyes open to this world that's very important to the rest of Canada is a great thing that we're learning from you. But it's and probably not so much like in the Yukon or Northwest Territories so much, but so I wanted to shift a little bit. I don't want to like miss this opportunity in the podcast, but just kind of like, what are some of the big waterfowl population, the conservation concerns that you're working on, programs, that are more, I guess, is that more like the production side of things, production and habitat conservation side of things?
Yeah. We've had
big ticket items.
As I mentioned, in the 90s, we kind of shifted to get more engaged directly with habitat and trying to address some key challenges. And if you look at the wetland, the trends of wetland loss over time.
Okay.
We're losing wetlands every year, right? And
still
it's not 70. We haven't lost 70% of our wetlands. That's something that I've heard my entire career, and it's still being espoused by pretty much everybody. But if you look at the data that Canadian Wildlife Service has, they have a loss rate of probably on an annual basis about 0.4% of wetlands get drained every year. And specific to the shallow wetlands within crop fields, that rises up to about 0.8 or 0.9, 0.88% per year. That doesn't sound so bad, so less than 1% per year, but obviously if you run that over a longer time horizon, it starts to kind of concern you. If these prairie potholes that were created by the retreat of the glaciers, 12,000 years ago, whatever it was, if we're losing, say, say a 50-year period, I think Mark and I were both over the 50 years. So in one lifetime, if we lose a third, a half of the wetlands, that's not a great legacy, is it?
Yeah.
And
it's also relates to the percentage of the loss seems small, like you said, but it's the impact that these are the highest productivity breeding sites.
absolutely.
So
Yeah,
we're not losing marginal habitat, we're losing the best of the best, which is
that's
these
right.
little things that most people don't. Oh, what's that little? The farmer plowed that little cattail area down, and it's like, oh, that might have been producing 100 ducks a year. That little spot. So
Yeah, and really the wetlands do a number of things, but first and foremost, they drive the carrying capacity of the land for the population density. So the more robust, or the more number of sheer basins that you have on a per square mile basis, or however you want to look at it, the higher number of ducks settle there every spring. So if you take away from that, you're going to have less ducks settling there and less capacity to try and produce more ducks. So the wetlands really, if you lose that, what do you have left? So if you lose the wetlands, and it's an erosion over time, like I said, and so it's a big concern with that loss rate. And so deltas, there's lots of groups work in this space. It's and delta's not in it and actually signing up farmers and landowners, but we work with other groups to do that. And so initially, when I first started with Delta, we had a small program in the 90s, and we were signing up farmers directly, called Adopt a Pothole. And so duck hunters could adopt a pothole. Now, that's not a hole in a road, that's a wetland. We got that question.
We don't want to fill it in.
That's right. Exactly. So anyway, so we linked hunters up directly to the great farmers that kind of, preside over the land. And it was a great partnership. And, the hunters from all over North America, school groups and other things, would reach out to the landowners, and it created this real cool vibe and created a real value around these wetlands, a real and perceived, because the farmers were getting a small payment for that. And that evolved. We changed that, and we worked with a group in Manitoba that started to sign easements. I mentioned that the easements started in the 90s, and we shifted away from doing these 10-year agreements with farmers, and we pushed that whole program over to this Manitoba Habitat Conservancy to do easements. And so that program.
So are easements the same as a covenant?
Yes, it's something that gets registered on the title of the land, so that the future landowners would be aware of its existence and would have to abide by that covenant. Yeah.
Yeah. So if quarter section had a little 10-hectare wetland area, and you had a conservation covenant or an easement on it, and that land was sold, that goes with the sale, and it legally binds the new landowner to continue to meet certain conditions in that wetland area.
That's right. And so
that's how they work, right?
That's exactly right. And you're slightly off on your size there, but yeah, most of these wetlands are probably the average, depending on the class of wetlands, but the average would be less than an acre. Hate to use the imperial, but anyway, the less than a half a hectare, essentially. They're very small and they're very numerous. So some sections, again, square mile, might have 200 wetlands on it. That's the magnitude that it would attract. They could attract 100 pairs of ducks each spring, one section of land. So that's the density. Yeah. That's why there's such a focus on the 3 prairie pothole provinces of Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan.
Yeah. Now, something like if you're a farmer, like, and you kind of picture your field, like the most efficient thing is like back and forth with the big circle things. But now your land is peppered with these little potholes. You got to go around all that stuff with your tilling machines and whatnot. And that must be like time consuming and costs the farmer money and annoying as
Absolutely.
all heck. So the incentive would be, as soon as, and I think we saw this in northern Alberta last year, is a low water table like the last several years. And these big cattail areas were literally just cattails in the middle of the field. There's no wet ground. And the farmers are kind of like, yeah, I think I'll be able to till this year because I'm not going to get stuck if I go through it. And I guess that's the incentive, is to try to homogenize the field for
It's
more efficient farming.
like everything, Mark. It's complex, eh? So there's
Okay.
wetlands that change in status. So there's, as we know, there's droughts and flood periods over years of time. So a wetland may be full of water one year, be over brimming and causing flooding and problems, or it could be like the last couple of years in Alberta and Saskatchewan, very dry. So drought, extreme drought, on and on. So you see these scenarios, and so the producers react to that, and like you said, they might get in and seed an area one year, and then the next year it's wet, or a couple of years later, and so it ebbs and flows over time, and I think that's okay. The challenge that we don't want to see as duck people is drainage, because then the wetlands are gone. It's over. And to try and restore previously drained wetlands is probably the hardest thing we have, and certainly in our duck world, to accomplish, just because going backwards for a landowner is often very challenging. Not to say that, some people will do that, but it's not, really popular with big agricultural producers. And you hit the nail on the head, Mark. You know the issue. That's exactly it. Producers they own this land, and to farm around a number of obstacles in the farm is inefficient, costing them time, and time means fuel. It means, inputs and their time itself, and especially when they're racing against the clock to put in big crops. The other component is the farm equipment is so much bigger these days that, it's just harder to have these little obstacles in there. And they get stuck,
Yeah,
and
that
so,
makes sense.
on, and they're paying tax, even though it's less tax. There's a perception around how much tax they may be paying, and if they were, say, thinking about selling the land, if they had more cleared acres, they could make more money, because that's how they get paid, is on the cultivated acre. And so there's all these market signals stacked up against keeping the wetlands. So financially speaking, drain all the wetlands you got, right? That, purely economically speaking, for sure, we get it. So what we're trying to do is come in and say, well, fair enough. How about we provide an ecosystem services payment? I mean, we care about the ducks, but there's all these other environmental benefits of keep retaining these wetlands on the land. So that's storing carbon in the soil. It's keeping nutrients in the soil that can, potentially be
Aquifer
released into
recharge.
aquifers and get, into lakes, causing algae blooms, and like you're talking about, storing water in the groundwater and aquifers. So there, and other biodiversity components, and in fact, even the farmers themselves have benefits from pollinators that are living in these wetlands and stuff. So what we're trying to do is to come up with government money to help provide a payment to the farmers for all the wetlands that they have on their farms. And that,
Okay.
we actually have that now in Manitoba, thanks to a government about 4 years ago. Premier Pallister brought this in, largely thanks also to a former Delta, a brilliant man who worked with Delta for a long time, Jonathan Scarth, who helped bring the legislation in for easements. He also worked as Premier Pallister's chief of staff and principal secretary, and he helped bring in a program that's based on payment for ecological goods and services. that put $202 million into the Winnipeg Foundation. So outside of government, took taxpayers' money and formed an endowment fund that is then delivered by watershed districts to pay farmers for doing good environmental things on their farms. And including in that, 50 million of that is specific for wetland conservation.
Now, from a cost benefit perspective in conservation, it's got to be cheaper to invest in a program like that to protect existing potholes and pay farmers to kind of like work around them than it is to go back to a given piece of land and say we're going to try to recover 100 of these little things. Like, there must be an order of magnitude more would have to be spent on restoration versus conservation. So would that be true? Like,
we've seen examples of restoration if you can get them. It's hard to get to begin with, but you're talking tens of thousands of dollars per acre. It's just hard. It's a hard thing to do, and no fault to any delivery entity whatsoever. It's an expensive endeavor. And so, yeah.
Well, especially if the water table's been lowered and you've got to like figure out where you're getting water from, and ditching and diking and or sinking water wells and pumps and, you know, and stuff like that to get water back at surface would be just, yeah, cost prohibitive almost in this day and
Well,
age.
again, it depends on the year. Some years when you're having flood problems in the prairies, that's not on your mind whatsoever. But
water's cheap.
but the last couple of years, you're spot on, right? Because the water tables have dropped so dramatically that it's challenging that way now. So it ebbs and flows, like you said. Yep.
So on sort of on the habitat piece, you'd mentioned at the beginning of the show about like nest boxes and that sort of thing. So maybe fill folks in on like, why do you do that? Like, that's got to be expensive. What's your gain? Like, how big is your program? And
so we have been working on both predator management. We started doing research on it in '94. The hen houses, or mallard nesting cylinders, we started with in about 1991. So those two tools, obviously the hen house side, not controversial whatsoever. It produces mostly mallards. About 95+% of the ducks that nest in them are mallards, which hunters tend to actually like, as it turns out. And the predator management stuff is not without its challenges, just because it's, you know, you're managing one population, maybe an overabundant population of medium-sized predators to the benefit of ducks and possibly other, you know, prey, if you will. And research, we've done extensive research on both of those tools. In Manitoba, the hen houses, as an example, in an area that a student from University of Saskatchewan looked at, he determined that over 95% of the mallard ducklings in that area hatched out of hen houses. And nest success on the ground during his study averaged, over a 3 or 4 year period, averaged 2%. So 1 out of 50 duck nests that started was hatching, at least in the ones that he found. Like, there's challenges with research, obviously, but and whereby the hen houses, the nest success was over 60%. So you can see,
just so folks can envision, the hen houses are those. They're like you make a tube out of mesh, pack it with straw or weeds or whatever, and then it's on a post.
Exactly.
So
out in a wetland,
fly up into it out in the wetland, so that. But if the hen goes up on the shore and tucks herself into the weeds or just on the edge, depending on how close the field is being cropped to the shoreline, sometimes they're just sitting out there and then almost in the plain open almost. And so everything from hawks, owls to skunks, foxes, everything are you're a sitting duck. That must be where that saying came from.
Well, and it's challenging for a duck because they lay an egg a day and then they incubate them for 26 days. And for the dabbling duck species, obviously there's plenty of different types of ducks, but the dabbling ducks, they're nesting in the upland primarily. Mallards will sometimes nest out over water, but mostly in the grasslands. Different species go different distances from water, but mallards and pintails might be a mile away from the nearest water. As in there, I mean, traditionally not, but so you think about that. If you're out there and you're trying to pull off a 35-day period without being detected by a raccoon or a skunk or any number of things, it's challenging. And we've, since we settled the prairies, we've completely altered the predator community, right? If you were to come here, if we were so lucky to have grown up 150 years ago or something and went and checked it out, what would we have seen in Prairie Canada? It'd be grizzly bears, wolves, right? Swift fox. There wouldn't have been any raccoons. There might have been the odd one, but and far fewer
nearly
skunks.
As many coyotes.
Right. And so it's completely altered. So not only did we, change the habitat, we wanted to grow crops, obviously, to feed ourselves, but so it's, we're not blaming anybody, but, the situation has changed so dramatically that maybe you want to consider predator management. It's challenging. It's controversial, and it's not for everybody. Not all organizations are chomping at the bit to get engaged with this. So it is a challenge for us, but we are taking it on, and we're working with government to acquire permits to do all this work, and it's going well, and the research is showing that it truly does work, and we're essentially tripling nest success using. And that's for an array of species, and we're trying to figure it out right now for the overwater nesting species like canvasback and other diving ducks. But that has proven really challenging because we're just not that effective at catching raccoons, as it turns out. But then like I said, the hen houses with those stark differences in nest success. And there's also benefits. The other thing we know is that about 30 to 35% of hens die during the breeding season. So we have a skew in the sex ratios now that's become much bigger. So we're seeing, 2 to 3 to 1 male to female ratios now. And that's just because the hens are getting taken also. So if you have, especially something like a fox that detects a nest, sneaks up on the grass, and if you're the hen, you're camouflaged and you have a decision to make. Even if maybe you don't even know the fox is coming, but if you know it's coming, if you flush, you're giving up your clutch. So, as you've probably seen walking around, Mark, you've probably flushed ducks up off nests. Sometimes like when we're studying them, sometimes you literally have to kind of like move the duck away with your hand to get to study the eggs or count the eggs or whatever you're doing. Because especially as they're getting close to hatch, they have so much invested in that clutch that's about to hatch in a day or two or something. You're not going to give that up very easily, are you?
Yeah.
So it's challenging. And so these tools can be effective for not only hatching dramatically more nests, but also saving more hens as well.
Yeah. That, I think when we've had Dr. Lee Foote on the show before, he's talked about this sort of these imbalances in the drake to hens in the mallard populations, and he goes, one, the drakes are like the horniest bird that there ever existed. Like he says, they'll mate with a fence post, and they outnumber the hens 3-1. So he's just like, he's got a green head, shoot it. It's just like he's like, there's no holding back. And I think just observation wise, it does seem like a 3-1 ratio even in the fall of greenheads to hens.
Yeah, so our goal with the duck production pillar, we started a campaign, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago now, and the goal is to raise 1 million ducks every year using these
Okay.
tools. And so that means expanding upon our use of these two tools throughout the prairie pothole region, and that's between both countries. And
Yeah.
so, for example, what that
And you're
means,
monitoring that. So
yeah, so that's going to take us a while. Our initial goal was to raise $250 million for an endowment to help prop this up. And so we're probably at about 220 million has been raised so far, something in that. I don't know the exact number right now, but um, and so that will mean, for example, for hen houses, to take it from where we're at today of about I don't know, maybe 15,000, 13,000 hen houses, all the way up to over 110,000 hen houses. So massive undertaking, and so we're
now, is
dead
that
serious
just in
about.
Manitoba?
No, that's all three prairie provinces,
Okay.
as
Okay.
well
Wow.
as North and South Dakota primarily is where that goes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Part of that whole program. Wow. What's the life expectancy of a box or a hen house?
Yeah, we think we lose about, when you first put out 100, we often do them in lots of 100. So we have contractors all through the prairies delivering this for us. You probably lose about 5%, initially. And that's an array of reasons. It could be a moose pushing them over. It could, but largely it's ice movements, in the spring,
Push
during spring.
bending the poles and
Yeah.
stuff. Right. Right. Okay.
So you can't put them on big, we've learned a lot over the years. We've learned how not to do a lot of
Trial and
these
error.
things, Mark? But yeah.
Huh. Wow. Yeah, that's a big endeavor. I mean, I guess it's one of those things too that, there's a limitation when we're artificially creating something to sustain such a large portion of the population. You kind of want these natural solutions, nature to kind of like we might fill in for a period of time, but nature needs to go back, or at least provide. That's the most cost effective way. Is there is that in the horizon? Is that an option that
As far as doing it all natural, the natural way, yeah,
yeah, like is something ecologically, like if we look after wetlands, ecologically, are things going to move back to where, let's just say in 25 or 50 years from now, it's like we don't need nest boxes anymore
that
because
would be
we've got
wonderful,
back.
Mark. I
Like
love
I
that
know
question
the
because
cavity nesting, right? Like, I mean, that's a removal, a degradation, an impact of removing like big old cottonwood trees and stuff around the wetlands and the riparian areas, which are hundreds and hundreds of years old, that wood ducks and the various cavity nesters used. So yeah, we got to go back and put boxes on posts for them, because it's half a century to get trees of that size and that age and that decay for the cavities to come back. So is there, yeah,
yeah, we
it's an open-ended question, but can nature get back to providing nest boxes?
yeah. I mean, again, if we could go back 150 years and live our lives back in the day, we probably would have had more fun, Mark? But I don't know. It's a great question. I'm a very optimistic person, and I'd like to think that we'll get there. And I think what it's going to take is people, our society embracing nature, spending money, like make it a priority and spend serious money. We often think, oh, geez, hey, we raised $1 million or something, and you think that's great and everything, and then you look at our federal or our provincial budgets, and you contrast that to what we're spending on these types of things, and it's a pittance, right? It's
Yeah,
nothing. Not to
the
belittle anybody's
percentage.
efforts, but we're just not that serious about these things, and we could be
Mm-hmm.
spending literally hundreds of millions of dollars on this stuff, if it was our priority, and I
Yeah,
you know, and
taking care of the land that provides for everybody is such a decimal point in provincial budgets. We've seen that a lot, and it just, I think to
yes,
the average person, you don't even have to hunt, but if you understand that, you know, less than 0.1% of your province's provincial budget actually goes back into taking care of the land that, you know, creates this way of life and supports, you know, livelihoods, you would be shocked. And I think people expect more from that.
and
And just slapping down some national parks isn't gonna fix all that. It's every corner of the province needs to have some level of conservation at varying scales, not just these big, you
and,
know,
and I'm
flash in the pan glamorous things.
I'm optimistic. The farmers themselves are the best stewards that I know. So they have it
Good.
in their
That's
hearts.
cool.
And who cares more? One of the ranchers I worked with in Alberta said, "Who cares more about the land than us? Because we live here." And so Delta created this EG&S program called Alice. It's still a going concern, working with farm communities and putting the farmers on the soapbox to talk about the environment. And so a little bit of encouragement, a little bit of money coming their way through these EG&S type programs, they'll embrace it. They care about this stuff way more than the average Canadian. And so there's reason to be optimistic, and it can occur. It's just going to take some financial wherewithal to help move the needle. And so
Exactly, and that totally makes a lot of sense. And I follow, like on social media, I follow some farm operations. Like there's one in southern Alberta, the Burke Ranch, and it's one of the places where the Alberta Conservation Association is they're getting private landowners to shepherd the reintroduction of turkey flocks onto private land. And it's like, so here's these farmers that are like, yeah, we'll take 30 birds, and they look after them in the wintertime and they count them because they want, you know, the population to kind of flourish and move on. But like, I'm following, and they're talking about spring turnout and you know, where the fescues are at, and the elk are still on the range, and you know, this water thing is doing this, and you know, it's like it just
it's magical.
everything holistically about the land. But we still have to respect the fact that they're trying to grow food for people. Some of them are trying to grow cows, and some of them are trying to grow grains, and
And that's
but
just,
it's not like they don't care.
and that's the essence of a program like Alice or the Grow program in Manitoba, paying farmers a little market signal, so that because without that, the only financial market they have is through the food and fiber they produce. But changing that to the environmental outcomes that they also currently provide and could provide much more if given that market signal, so i.e. some money, right? And
Yeah,
work together
yeah.
with them to fully embrace that and see that flourish. That's where it's at. It's really exciting stuff.
Oh, it sure is. Curtis and I did a field tour in southern Alberta a couple summers ago, and there a landowner was investing in a lot of like wetland and upland game bird, you know, habitat amongst their so they had the big circle crops. But so you got these corners, you know, a square with a circle in the middle. If you got these little corners where you can kind of like fit in upland game bird and brood habitat and nesting habitat, and then some reconstructed some wetlands and got some water and stuff moving around. But one of the exciting things that they had that was going on in an adjacent area was these farmers have to pay to bring pollinator contractors in to pollinate their fields. But they're doing research. A PhD student was doing a research to look at the adjacent areas of upland and wetland habitat protection and enhancement, and the impact that has on the native pollinators. And what was really fascinating is they were actually looking at the predators, primarily spiders, that lived in the habitat that was being protected for waterfowl. And then they ventured out into the fields a certain distance, and they were taken care of the bug
Yes.
species that would attack
Yeah.
the native pollinators. So they were kind of looking for this balance of where could you have this network of habitats and upland that would essentially maybe one day down the road eliminate the need for artificial pollinators, and the economic return to that landowner would be massive. And that's a tiny little aspect of all the things that you're talking about, but it's something that's very important to ag producers that wouldn't even think would matter to an agriculture producer, but very cool stuff.
Oh yeah. Yep. It's all there for us to improve, right? And just encouraging folks to get engaged with these types of conversations. Encourage, a little encouragement to the governments that are running provincial and federal coffers to invest in these types of things. It's all there for us.
For conservation.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely a big challenge in everywhere in this country. Man, wow, we could be in the duck blind here for hours. This stuff is just so fascinating. Are there any kind of other big things that you wanted to impart on people that Delta's really championing, and what can folks do for you?
Yeah, I think there's two things that are really that I'd like to just touch on. So one goes back to that
Absolutely.
to the wetland protection. So we've, these EG&S programs can be a myriad of improving the land for all of us and all different reasons. Our big interest as a duck hunting organization are the wetlands themselves. So we're trying to take the component in Manitoba with the shallow wetlands. It's called the SWIP, or Shallow Wetlands Incentive Program. Too many acronyms, but anyway, we're trying to take that now and get it going in Alberta. So I've been working on that for the last 3 years to try and promote that amongst a whole array of groups and government in Alberta. And now we're going to start thinking about Saskatchewan as well to try and get some financial investment in that. The other thing, switching back to the hunting side, is that the good governments of Quebec and BC have this hunter apprentice licensing, whereby people can just go hunting. So, Mark, if I met you on a Friday and you were a passionate hunter and fully like a hunter that had all you need to have, and I had not a hot clue and I just was curious and interested, well, you could take me tomorrow. I would just have to sign up for an apprentice license, and away we go, and I give it a try, just like any other activity where you might endeavor in this
they
world.
have that in fishing, like the fish free for a weekend or
Exactly.
whatever, because they just want people to give it a whirl.
And so Quebec and BC actually have it. Quebec brought it in 2003, and BC followed in 2013. Since then, I've been promoting that every year, and I've gotten nowheresville. And so we are
in the other provinces.
We're currently promoting that one, and I think that's one that people could get excited about, because in the U.S. there's, I think, 47 states or something that have this and are doing robust research on it, and I think it's really moving the needle. And there's a whole bunch of stuff we could do to improve regulations and red tape and barriers, but I think this is one, especially for us in Canada, that we need to be serious about and start thinking about ways to remove all the barriers. Because right now you say, oh, hey, you want to come hunt with me, Jim? Well, okay, well, you can't actually shoot something. You can't shoot the gun at a duck flying by, but we could take you to the range and shoot at a clay flying by, but not a duck, eh? So anyway, like we got some work to do to enable that and allow us to just go and try it, and who knows, you might find you like it and take it up, just like any other activity that we try.
Well, and that's how I understood the way the collegiate program was set up that our friend Mateen at UBC Okanagan did, was like, it was college students that expressed an interest in waterfowl hunting. So the program was going to go from like theory classroom to preparation in the kitchen, like end to end.
Yeah, absolutely.
But there were some of the students were like, I want to go through the whole process, but I'm not ready to shoot a duck, but I want to sit in the blind and see what this actually looks like. Then I'll have a better understanding. And so some of the students were actually just, they just sat in the blind and somebody else would shoot a duck, but then they would carry on, learning how to clean it and prep it and in a meal plan for the night. But it was like, but then conversely, if somebody else like, heck yeah, I want to try to shoot one of these ducks flying out of the air, then they had the opportunity to do that under that type of a program and not have to say, well, you got to go take the hunter training course and yada, yada, yada. And just to find out going like, man, I can't hit these ducks, or I don't like this, or, it's not my thing. So
yeah, it's massive opportunity. We had a female student out at our Delta Marsh hunt about 5 years ago now. And she was observing and she liked doing video. She calls herself the environmental musician. But anyway, so she came out for 2 or 3 years just to observe. And I think the third year she says, I'm hunting this year, Jim. And I went, really?
Cool.
And so she came out and she actually got her first duck with me. My dog brought it back. And now she's planning to go turkey hunting right now. So you're right. We got to remove these old arcane barriers, because I mean, there's probably a lot of people that kind of do this anyway. They have a friend or a family member, and they just say, "Well, we're going duck hunting," and then they might kind of say, "Here, you want to try a shot?" And okay, look around.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
I mean, it's not that scary of a thing. Let's do it. Let's go for it. And so anyway, so that. I just thought we're working on that one right now.
Absolutely. That's a good one to pitch. And there's a lot of controversy about, the R3 and the hunting, especially down in the States. And it's like overcrowding, decline of turkey populations, states cutting back on non-resident opportunities and stuff to overcrowding. And the R3 thing is being criticized. But for waterfowl hunting here in Canada, and I've looked at the numbers, and I remember a few years ago we built an infographic to communicate this. Generally across the board over the longer term, most migratory birds, the entire guild, are doing quite well in North America. A lot of the other guild species are on the declines, except for our migratory birds, and particularly our waterfowl. And then particularly the segment of the waterfowl, like the snow geese and stuff, they're like gone way too far. Conservation's been too successful, and we're trying to figure out how to manage overabundance. So we have this robust, like, flying food population on the North American continent, but in Canada, waterfowl hunter numbers are on the decline, and they have been since like the 60s, if I remember the numbers right.
Yeah.
That is not a good trend to have an upward game population and a declining hunter population. So,
yeah,
access is an issue and whatnot. But I feel with you guys, R3 is incredibly important to waterfowl hunting, the future of it, and how that connects to conservation of wetlands.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. To me, the decline in the hunter means there's plenty of opportunity. We do have to address some access issues. Obviously, that's another topic for another day, but it is such a wonderful resource and, lifestyle and all that. And our population in Canada is certainly growing. So to see the actual decline in the numbers of hunters since it peaked, I think in 78 or 79, and we had in 2022, we had fresh all-time new lows in the numbers of Canadian duck hunters. So we're concerned.
Yeah, definitely a big concern. How can folks support Delta? Like, can you get a membership? Do you get a magazine? Like,
yeah, we have
a chapter where.
Yeah, we have.
How does that work for you guys?
I guess a few different things, but yeah, obviously you can go online and join Delta Waterfowl. You can also look, we have a find your event tab on our website that, you can see if there's a chapter nearby. That's really good because then you can join other like-minded people that are really giving. Those are our best members, or the people that volunteer and take time out of their lives and are very passionate about it. That's especially great if you're, maybe moved to a new part of the country, or, or new at hunting and want to meet some like-minded individuals. It's great to get involved that way. And so those chapters, they do a number of things for us. Obviously, they raise a bunch of money for Delta. Some of it stays in their local community. There's a portion of the funds that the chapters spend locally. But those also help us with our advocacy efforts, depending on which province you're in. The chapters play an incredibly important role in influencing the politicians and other decision makers. So yeah, all those things are important to funding Delta and allowing us to do the work on behalf of duck hunters.
Fantastic. And you're easy to find on the web. I think it's just deltawaterfowl.org.
That's right.
.com.
Yeah, and all our staff are there as well. Our board and our staff are all highlighted, and you can learn about people across Canada there as well.
Yeah, no, it's great work you're doing, and I really encourage folks, if you got any interest in waterfowl hunting, get a membership in Delta and connect locally. And it's one of the best areas, I think that's this blend between like hunting and conservation. Like it's one and the same. And I think the sheep hunting world is very much like that. It's like you can't separate hunters and their passion for sheep hunting in the high mountains with the work that they're doing on diseases and relocation and collaring. Like and I think that's matched equally in the waterfowl world. So, if conservation and biodiversity is a big thing, and you're looking for a way to combine that with learning about hunting, man, it's waterfowls hunting is the place to go. So, because you don't need a 70-pound pack and have to climb up steep mountains. So, especially if you're at my age, they got those robotic wheelchairs and stuff. We can get out to the duck blind in 30 years from now. So, if that's probably not on most people's long-term plan, but it is on mine. So, just prop me up in the blind and pick me up at dusk.
I'm right with you, Mark. Yeah.
Cool. Jim, this has been amazing. Thank you. Learning so much about your organization and just like history and ecology and active conservation. And I love the whole conversation about kind of like the need for hands-on conservation management in the prairie pothole region, because it's a heavily altered ecosystem because of humans' need to grow food, which obligates us to do active management, which is nest boxes, which is conservation covenants with owners, and as predator management. It's like there is no hands-off, let nature take care of itself approach to the duck factory of North America and the Canadian pothole region, because it's smack in the middle of the most altered ecosystem that we have, I think, is our ag producing. And I'm with you. There's the win-win-win is there in Canada for all of this to happen. And if that's part of what's in your heart, get involved with Delta, folks. Get a shotgun and get out there and invest in some ammunition, if nothing else. We just need the Pittman-Roberts thing in Canada so that all of those spent shells and you come home with 2 ducks and missing 2 or 3 boxes is contributing to conservation. But right now it's just contributing to buying more shells. But in the United States, Delta has its mark on some brands of ammunition, right? Like there's a little bit of a kickback from some of the ammo manufacturers.
Yeah, I should mention we have an expo. The last 3 years we started a waterfowling expo. It's been down in the south. Last year it was in
Missouri.
It was in Little Rock, Arkansas, and then it was in Baton Rouge last year, and it's in Oklahoma this summer. And it's the waterfowling event in North America, and there's lots of us Canucks go down to it. I shouldn't probably mention the shell brands, but I know I'll mention a few like Federal, Boss, Kent. There's a number of them that are supportive of Delta and partners, and along with a number of other industry partners, obviously. And we actually, when it was in Little Rock, just north there, is where Federal has a plant, and so we went. Some of the board members and a few of the staff went over and checked out the plant where they're making all kinds of shells every day. Millions of shells get produced. It was quite something to be a part of.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, man, I'd love to go to Oklahoma. I might have to look at the travel budget and go down there, tag along with you guys. I think that'd be pretty awesome. So, Jim, thanks so much. Thanks for the work that you guys are doing and you're doing personally. This is a massive country, big spread out ecosystems, and you're dealing with some of the smallest species of game animals that we have, out there, down to the little teals and whatnot. So glad you have a passion for it, and glad Delta's doing everything that you are on the 4 pillars. So appreciate it. Curtis?
I was just going to say thank you, Mark, for all your work, and you're obviously well versed in all these topics yourself. I'm very impressed and appreciate that.
No, that's part of our job too, is learn as much as we can and educate ourselves, and folks like yourself just help do that more and sharing it to people, and they're learning as well. So appreciate it. Right on, Curtis, bring us home.
Alrighty. The Hunter Conservationist Podcast is brought to you by J. Martin Taxidermy out of West Kelowna, British Columbia. Even if you're not in the market for getting something mounted, shoot him a message. Say, hey, thanks, Jesse. Heard about you on the show. I appreciate you supporting the guys and the conversations they bring to the table. I'm sure he'd appreciate that, knowing that he's getting some reach from listeners. So he's pretty awesome supporting us, and we're happy that he is. So as always, big thanks to Jesse for his continuing support here. And if you are in the market to get something mounted, some ducks, maybe you get a turkey this spring, send it to Jesse, because he does have some pretty spectacular work that he does. So thanks, Jesse.
Absolutely. And the most important thing I want you to take away is the message about the connection between hunting and wetland conservation, and the fun that's involved in waterfowl hunting. And they taste good. I just love mallards, and I just like to get a bunch of them every year. And then the other thing I want you to remember is the next time you're talking to somebody and they're down on taxidermy because that's just for trophy hunting or whatever, just say, hey, our ecologists around the world and their understanding of wildlife and evolution would not be where it is today if it wasn't for Charles Darwin and his theory of descent with modification, having learned taxidermy. So he changed the course of our understanding of the natural world because he had an interest in taxidermy. So there's a little tidbit for you. All right, folks, thanks for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.